Picture this. It's 1854, and a group of British bankers walk into Istanbul carrying a briefcase full of papers. When they leave, they own a piece of an empire. This isn't a robbery, it's something far more elegant. Welcome to the world's first modern debt trap, a financial weapon so effective it makes military conquest look expensive and inefficient. This is the story of how Britain, along with its French partners in crime, discovered that you don't need to invade a country to own it. You just need to hold its mortgage. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how they did it. The year is 1853, and the Ottoman Empire still looks powerful on maps. The Sultan commands territory from the Balkans to Arabia, from Anatolia to North Africa. Millions of subjects, control of the holy cities, the crossroads of 3 continents. But here's what those maps don't show. The empire is economically dying. While Britain builds steam engines and railway networks, while factories in Manchester flood global markets with textiles, the Ottoman economy is stuck in medieval mode. We're talking wooden plows, corrupt tax collectors who steal half the revenue before it reaches Istanbul, and a treasury that's perpetually empty. For centuries, the Ottomans had creative solutions to cash problems. Option A, debase the currency. Just melt coins and add cheap metal. Option B, confiscate wealth from rich officials on trumped-up charges. But by 1850, these medieval tricks don't work anymore. The empire needs capital, real capital, to build a modern army, to defend against the Russian Empire constantly probing their borders, to construct telegraphs and roads. There's just one problem. The Ottomans have a deep cultural and religious aversion to borrowing from Christian Europe. Islamic law forbids usury, and politically, taking loans from Britain or France feels like surrendering independence. The sultans resist the temptation. Until 1853. Russia invades Ottoman territory, and suddenly the sultan faces an existential crisis. The military is obsolete, the treasury is empty. They're about to lose a war that could end the empire. Britain and France, terrified of Russian expansion, decide to help. They send armies and fleets to the Black Sea. But they also send something far more dangerous: bankers. Sultan Abdul-Majid I is desperate. The war costs millions of gold liras the empire doesn't have. His advisors tell him there's no choice. To save the empire, he must break the ancient taboo. In 1854, the Ottoman Empire signs its first foreign loan agreement. Here's where the satire writes itself. Loan amount, £3 million. Amount actually received, £2.4 million, issued at 80% of face value. Interest owed, on the full £3 million. The bankers cut, £600,000 as commissions and risk premiums. Let me translate this financial sorcery. The bankers keep 20% up front. The Sultan receives only 80% in cash. But, and here's the beautiful part, the Ottoman Empire pays interest on 100% of the loan amount forever. It's like taking a mortgage for $100,000, receiving only $80,000, but making payments on the full $100,000 forever. The bankers call this managing risk. Anyone else would call it predatory lending. But the cash that arrives feels like a miracle. Suddenly, the army can be paid, cannons can be cast, ships can be provisioned. The Russians are defeated in 1856, and the Sultan feels a rush of relief and power. He's discovered a magic trick. With a signature on paper in London, he can summon floods of gold to his doorstep. The war ends in 1856. The borrowing doesn't. Between 1854 and 1875, the Ottoman Empire takes out 18 major foreign loans from British and French banks. Each one comes with punishing terms. Each one digs the hole deeper. The Ottoman elite taste the forbidden fruit of easy credit, and they become instantly addicted. The Sultan looked at the Palace of Versailles and thought, "I want one of those." The British bankers thought, "Perfect, we'll lend you the rope to hang yourself, and we'll charge you interest on it." The Ottoman elite feel a deep sense of inferiority when they look at Paris and London with their gaslit boulevards and marble opera houses. They want Istanbul to prove they're not the sick man of Europe, but a civilized, wealthy power. So they begin spending borrowed money. Not on factories, not on irrigation, not on education, not on anything that generates returns. They spend it on vanity. Sultan Abdulaziz decides the old Topkapi Palace, home of sultans for 400 years, is too old-fashioned, too Asian. He wants a palace that rivals Versailles, a palace that makes Queen Victoria jealous. He orders construction of a massive edifice on the Bosphorus shores. The Dolmabahce Palace contains 14 tons of gold leaf, the world's largest crystal chandelier, a gift from Queen Victoria, how thoughtful, baccarat crystal staircases, silk carpets worth fortunes, Italian marble walls, 285 rooms, 46 halls, and 6 Turkish baths. It is breathtakingly beautiful. It is also a financial tombstone. The cost? 5 million Ottoman gold liras, equivalent to 25% of the empire's entire annual tax revenue. While Anatolian peasants scratch livings from dry earth with wooden plows, the Sultan imports crystal from Bohemia and gold from France to decorate a house he cannot afford. To pay for this masterpiece of fiscal irresponsibility, the Sultan returns to the bankers again and again. 1855, new loan. 1858, another loan. 1860, yet another. 1862, why stop now? 1865, keep them coming. 1869, more please. 1871, just one more. 1873, surely this is the last one. Each time the bankers in London and Paris are delighted. They're making fortunes on commissions, typically 20 to 30% of face value, plus high interest rates ranging from 6% to 12% annually. But here's the key. They know the empire is struggling. They can see the books. Yet they keep lending because they assume Britain and France will never let the Ottomans fail. They're too geographically important. This is called moral hazard, taking enormous risks because you believe someone else will bail you out. Sound familiar? It's the same logic behind too big to fail banks in 2008. By the mid-1860s, the Ottoman financial situation devolves into pure farce. The empire generates insufficient tax revenue to pay interest on existing loans. So what do? They take out new loans to pay interest on old loans. They're digging holes to fill holes. The death spiral by the numbers. 1860, debt payments consume 15% of government revenue. 1865, debt payments consume 30% of government revenue. 1870, debt payments consume over 50% of government revenue. 1875, debt payments consume 65% of government revenue. By 1870, 50 cents of every dollar collected from fishermen, farmers, and merchants is leaving the country immediately to pay bondholders in London and Paris. What does this mean? No money for the army, no money for schools, no money for infrastructure, no money for anything except interest payments. The state is being hollowed out like a termite-infested house. The Galata bankers, loan sharks to the Sultan. To keep this circus running between big European loans, the government turns to local financiers, the Galata bankers, mostly Greek and Armenian families in Istanbul.
When the treasury runs dry, the Grand Vizier borrows from them at short-term rates of 18%, 20%, 25%, sometimes even higher. These aren't loans, these are financial suicide pacts. But wait, there's more vanity spending. Sultan Abdulaziz looks at the British Royal Navy with envy. He decides, I want one of those. He orders massive ironclad warships from British shipyards. He buys Krupp cannons from Germany. For a brief moment, the Ottoman Navy becomes the third largest in the world on paper. There's one tiny problem. The empire can't afford fuel or maintenance. The magnificent fleet sits in the Golden Horn, rusting because there's no coal to power the ships. They are floating monuments to debt, expensive paperweights made of iron. By 1875, the total Ottoman debt reaches approximately £200 million, roughly equal to 5 times the empire's annual revenue. The empire is technically insolvent. It's a corpse that hasn't stopped walking yet. In 1873, 2 disasters struck simultaneously. The global economy crashed, and Ottoman wheat crops died.
To a successful alliance,
the empire had
gentlemen.
run out of miracles, and the bankers were coming to collect. Welcome to the perfect storm. In 1873, a financial panic erupts in Vienna. It spreads across the globe like a contagion, triggering what historians call the Long Depression. Banks collapse, credit markets freeze, global capital dries up. European banks, suffering their own liquidity crises, stop lending. The music stops. At the exact same moment, nature turns against the Ottomans. A catastrophic drought strikes Anatolia in 1874 to 1875. Crops fail. Livestock die. The peasants who form the tax base face starvation. Tax collectors go into villages demanding payment. They find dust and corpses. The revenue stream collapses. But the debt payments remain fixed. Those bondholders in London still expect their quarterly interest, drought or no drought, famine or no famine. Grand Vizier Mahmud Nedim Pasha examines the books and realizes the game is over. Treasury is empty. Massive payment due to European bondholders in October, £5 million. Cash on hand, approximately £200,000. New loan attempts, all rejected. No one will lend a penny to the sick man. The empire faces an impossible choice: starve your own people to pay foreign bankers, or default. October 6, 1875, the Decree of Muharrem, default. The Ottoman government issues a decree that shakes financial centers across Europe. They announce debt payments will be cut in half. 50% in cash, 50% in paper IOUs, promising 5% returns, essentially worthless. In diplomatic language, a moratorium. In financial language, a default. The Ottoman Empire has declared bankruptcy. The European fury. Millions of middle-class investors in Britain and France who bought Ottoman bonds for high yields see their savings evaporate overnight. Vicars in England ruined. Shopkeepers in Paris wiped out. Retired civil servants destroyed. British newspapers scream that Turks are thieves. French papers demand military intervention. The diplomatic support Britain and France provided against Russia? Gone instantly. And this is where financial weakness invites military aggression. 1877, the Russo-Turkish War. Russia sees the Sultan is broke and friendless. They declare war. The Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878 is a catastrophe. Ottoman army fights bravely, but unpaid and undersupplied. Russian forces march to Istanbul's suburbs. They can see Hagia Sophia's minarets. The empire is forced to sign the humiliating Treaty of San Stefano and later the Treaty of Berlin. Loss of Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Montenegro. Loss of territory in the Caucasus. War indemnity 802.5 million francs to Russia. Now the Ottoman Empire owes 200 million pounds to British and French bankers, defaulted. 802.5 million francs to Russia, new debt. Total debt exceeds 6 times annual revenue. The empire is completely insolvent, defenseless, humiliated. Sultan Abdulhamid II sits in his palace knowing he rules a financial corpse. He waits for European powers to carve up his lands. But Britain and France have a different, more brilliant idea.
Our strategy will focus on
1881,
these key
the
regions,
British and
ensuring a
French
soft
had an
conquest through
epiphany.
economic influence
Why
and
waste
strategic
money
partnerships.
on soldiers and colonial governors when you can just repo the entire country's tax system? Welcome to financial colonialism, imperialism for the modern age. The British and French don't want to conquer the Ottoman Empire territorially anymore. That's messy and expensive. It requires armies, administration, colonial governors, and all the headaches of direct rule. They devised something far more elegant: economic annexation. If they simply take control of the Ottoman economy, they can extract wealth indefinitely without governing the people, without facing rebellions, without the costs of occupation. Representatives of European bondholders arrive in Istanbul. They're not generals, they're bankers wearing three-piece suits. They carry briefcases, not swords. They sit down with Ottoman officials and dictate terms of surrender. They're not asking for land, they're asking for something more valuable: the cash flow. This negotiation produces the decree that establishes the most elegant mechanism of soft imperialism ever devised: the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, OPDA. The OPDA is not a government agency, it's a corporation run by a board of directors representing British bondholders, French bondholders, German bondholders, Italian bondholders, Austrian bondholders, Ottoman bondholders, token representation. The OPDA headquarters is built in Istanbul, a massive fortress-like building in Galata that looms over the city, a physical symbol of who really rules. What the Sultan surrendered. The decree transfers the empire's most valuable revenue sources directly to this foreign corporation. Revenue streams given to OPDA. Tobacco monopoly, most valuable. Salt monopoly. Silk tithes. Stamp tax. Spirits tax. Fishing taxes. Tribute from Eastern Rumelia. Tribute from Bulgaria. Surplus from several provinces. The Sultan agreed he could no longer be trusted to collect his own taxes, so European bankers would do it for him. The machinery of extraction. The OPDA builds a parallel government. Over 5,000 tax collectors employed, wearing OPDA uniforms, carrying weapons, answering to the board in London, Paris, and Berlin, not the Sultan. They fan out across the empire, from Macedonia to Syria, from Anatolia to Iraq. They enter villages, markets, ports, and warehouses. If a fisherman catches fish in the Bosphorus, a portion goes to bondholders in London. If a farmer grows silk in Bursa, profit goes to Paris. If a peasant buys salt, the tax goes to Berlin. Here's the darkly ironic part. The OPDA is incredibly efficient. Unlike the corrupt Ottoman bureaucracy where officials steal half the revenue, the OPDA operates with modern European accounting standards. Professional auditing, detailed ledgers, efficient collection methods, investment in productive capacity. They build warehouses, they improve salt mines, they upgrade silk production by distributing disease-free silkworm eggs. They modernize tobacco cultivation. They actually grow the economy, but they grow it for creditors, not citizens. Between 1881 and 1914, 33 years, total OPDA collections approximately 2.2 billion francs. Paid to European bondholders, approximately 1.9 billion francs. OPDA operational costs, approximately 300 million francs. Percentage of Ottoman revenue controlled, 25 to 35% annually. Let that sink in. For 33 years, 1/4 to 1/3 of every coin generated by the Ottoman economy is siphoned off and sent abroad. The Ottoman government is left with scraps. They must run a massive empire, pay an army, maintain courts, and provide services with only 2/3 of their tax base. This creates a vicious cycle. Can't invest in education, population remains illiterate. Can't build factories, economy stays agricultural. Can't modernize infrastructure, competitiveness declines. Can't invest in military, empire stays weak. Trapped in permanent underdevelopment. The Sultan becomes a puppet. Abdul Hamid II reigns, but the OPDA rules. If he wants to build a school, he must ask bankers if money is left over. Usually, there isn't. If he wants to buy rifles for the army, he must request permission, often denied. The Sultan of a 600-year-old empire has become a middle manager in his own country, filing requests with foreign accountants. This isn't theoretical oppression. This is a bureaucratic takeover enforced by contract law. Sovereignty has been auctioned off for crystal chandeliers and ironclad ships that rust in harbors.
The Ottoman Empire made one last desperate gamble in 1914 to escape the debt trap. They bet everything on Germany. They lost everything. And the debt? The debt survived for another 40 years, haunting a country that no longer existed. By 1910, the Ottoman Empire is effectively a financial colony, but a new player enters the game with a seductive offer: Germany. While Britain and France are content squeezing the Ottomans for cash, Germany sees a strategic opportunity. Kaiser Wilhelm II visits Istanbul and tells the Sultan, "The British and French are parasites bleeding you dry. Germany wants to help you build." The Germans propose the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, a dream of steel connecting Europe to Middle Eastern oil fields, bypassing the British-controlled Suez Canal. For the Sultan, this is a potential lifeline. Rapid troop deployment to suppress rebellions, economic modernization, a powerful military ally. But who pays? The OPDA controls Ottoman finances. Germany says, "We'll lend you the money." Deutsche Bank becomes the primary financier, but the contracts are predatory. Kilometric guarantees. The Ottoman government must pay German companies a guaranteed profit for every mile of track, regardless of whether trains carry passengers or freight. Resource rights. German companies receive rights to all oil and minerals discovered within 20 kilometers on both sides of the tracks. The Sultan swaps British golden handcuffs for German steel chains. By 1910, German officers train the Ottoman army. German engineers operate the railways. German banks hold massive new debt. Germany effectively owns Ottoman infrastructure. Britain and France watch with fury. Germany is stealing their colony. The debt trap has become a geopolitical flashpoint pushing Europe toward World War I. The Ottoman leadership, now controlled by the Young Turk movement, realizes they're trapped. As long as the OPDA exists and debt remains, they're not a free nation. When war breaks out in Europe, they make a calculation. Join Germany. If Germany wins, cancel debts to Britain and France, abolish the OPDA, regain financial independence. It's betting everything on one hand. November 14, 1914, the Ottoman Empire enters World War I on Germany's side. One of the first acts, Ottoman forces march to OPDA headquarters in Istanbul. They expel British and French directors. They stop payments to London and Paris. For a brief, glorious moment, they feel freedom. But the gamble fails catastrophically. 1914 to 1918, the war is a disaster. Gallipoli campaign, heavy losses. Arab revolt, loses Middle Eastern territories. Russian front, defeats and retreats.
British take Jerusalem, Baghdad, Damascus. October 30th, 1918, the Ottoman Empire signs the Armistice of Mudros, unconditional surrender. November 1922, the Sultanate is abolished. The empire dies. But the debt survives. In 1923, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk founds the Turkish Republic after a brutal war of independence. The empire is gone, the Sultan is exiled, Turkey is a new nation. The European powers return with ledgers. At the Treaty of Lausanne, 1923, British and French negotiators demand the new Turkey pay the debts of the dead empire. You inherited the land, they say. You inherit the mortgage. You are the successor state. Ataturk's dilemma. He wants to refuse, but Turkey needs international recognition, trade relationships, access to capital markets, legitimacy in the global economy. He can't start a new nation as a defaulter. The British and French will isolate Turkey economically. The negotiation. After intense haggling, Turkey agrees to assume 67% of the Ottoman public debt. Original Ottoman debt, 1875, £191 million. Interest accumulated by 1923, additional millions. Turkey's agreed share, £110 million. Payment terms, restructured over 30-plus years at reduced interest. The Turkish Republic, poor, war-devastated, trying to build a modern nation from ruins, spends its first 3 decades sending millions of pounds abroad. Money desperately needed for schools, hospitals, roads, factories, agricultural development instead goes to pay for crystal chandeliers in Dolmabahce Palace, rusting ironclad warships, and interest on loans taken to pay interest on previous loans. Turkish citizens in the 1920s to 1950s pay for the vanity of sultans from the 1850s to the 1870s. May 25, 1954, the final payment. On this date, the Turkish Republic makes the final payment on Ottoman debt. It took exactly 100 years from 1854 to 1954 to pay off the mistake. 1 century of financial servitude. The brutal lesson. The Ottoman story proves several devastating truths. 1. You don't need soldiers to conquer a nation, just bankers. Britain and France never needed to garrison Istanbul. They never raised their flag over the Topkapi Palace. They simply waited for compound interest to do the work. 2. Debt is a more effective weapon than gunpowder. Military conquest costs money and creates rebellions. Financial conquest is self-funding. The victim pays for their own colonization through interest payments. 3. Vanity projects financed by debt are generational theft. The sultans who built Dolmabahce Palace never paid a penny. Turkish peasants in the 1940s paid for it. Peasants who never saw the palace never benefited from it, born 70 years after it was built. 4. Financial dependency destroys sovereignty. The Ottoman Sultan ruled millions but couldn't build a school without permission from foreign bankers. He had the appearance of power, but none of the substance. 5. Once the debt trap closes, there's almost no escape. The Ottomans tried everything. Taking new loans made it worse. Defaulting led to the OPDA. Switching creditors to Germany, which led to World War I. Fighting a war to cancel debt, which led to the empire's destruction. Nothing worked. The debt survived every attempt to kill it. The modern echo. Today, when nations borrow beyond their means, when governments finance consumption instead of investment, when foreign creditors gain leverage over domestic policy, when vanity projects are built with borrowed money, the ghost of the Ottoman debt trap whispers from history, "I warned you." The sick man of Europe didn't die of old age or military defeat. He was foreclosed upon. And the lesson is written in red ink across 100 years of ledgers. Sovereignty is not about flags and armies. Sovereignty is about solvency. If you do not own your debt owns you. The Ottoman Empire learned this the hard way. They paid for crystal chandeliers with a century of servitude.